Buongiorno a tutti voi collegati da Roma per questa seconda giornata dedicata alla conferenza generale sul tema I Dehoniani nel mondo. Tra pochi minuti saremo in collegamento diretto con Villa Aurelia per seguire i lavori di questa seconda giornata, ma prima di iniziare vogliamo farvi vedere brevemente una sintesi dei lavori di ieri. Prego la regia di mandare in onda il video. Vediamo questo video. La giornata di ieri è stata dedicata a Padre Deon e al suo contesto storico e sociale, mentre quest'oggi, i lavori di quest'oggi saranno dedicati soprattutto a vedere come appunto la nostra missione contribuisce a costruire il regno di Dio. Quindi i Dehoniani oggi si concentreranno sulla missione oggi nel regno di Dio. Se seguirete la diretta tutta la giornata avremo diversi ospiti. Innanzitutto questa mattina verso le 11 arriverà il cardinale Turkson e parlerà appunto della missione e dell'impegno sociale. Nel pomeriggio invece sentiremo direttamente un confratello della provincia italiana che è impegnato da anni nel lavoro sociale, padre Giuliano Stenico. Diciamo così subito che i lavori di oggi sono una continuazione molto stretta con quello che ieri abbiamo potuto fare. Come sempre vi invito a seguirci su questo nostro canale, ma potete anche direttamente seguire la conferenza via Zoom. In questo modo voi potrete anche essere attivi, porre domande, questioni e essere in diretta con la conferenza. Ora ci colleghiamo direttamente con Villa Aurelia, vedo già l'aula pronta e ascoltiamo tra poco la riflessione biblica con la quale si apre. A te la regia per andare in diretta con Villa Aurelia. E buon ascolto.
Qui nous sera donné par le Père Élie Lobato, supérieur du BSP. Alors j'invite ici le Père Élie pour nous donner sa méditation.
Estava dizendo, Padre Levi, quando entrou em contato comigo, pediu que eu preparasse uma breve meditação sob o título Identidade, Reparação, Adoração. Identidade. Somos seres humanos, cristãos, homens consagrados, presbíteros. Embora isso tudo pareça óbvio, na verdade não o é. A crise de identidade, da qual se falava nos imediatos anos antes, durante e pós-Concílio Vaticano II, foi se agravando, chegou ao fim do milênio, atravessou de um para outro e avança pelas novas décadas. As questões de gênero que se têm imposto sempre mais, a crescente insegurança a respeito da constituição matrimonial e familiar, os casos de má conduta por parte de membros do clero católico, os perfis polarizados entre padres católicos só confirmam a existência de uma ampla crise de identidade, de caráter pessoal e social, no interior do ser humano, na família, na sociedade, na igreja. Esta crise compreende uma tal profundidade e variedade que põe em questão a origem do ser humano, sua razão de existir e o seu fim último. Com o efeito em cascata, ela vai minando e corroendo também a identidade cristã em geral e a identidade dos religiosos e religiosos presbíteros. Nós nos tornamos uma só coisa com Ele, diz Paulo aos Romanos, referindo-se ao batismo. E de um modo peculiar, como lembra o decreto Perfecte Caritatis, pela consagração religiosa. Nos tornamos uma só coisa com Ele, o Cristo. Essa identidade não é algo externo que se acrescenta ao sujeito, mas é aquilo que faz dele um cristão consagrado. Nos casos daqueles que recebem a ordem, o sacramento da ordem, a identificação com o Cristo se potencializa no seu ser e deve traduzir-se no agir. Dos homens consagrados ao coração de Jesus, urge que, de modo esclarecido e fundamentado, se apropriem de sua identidade vocacional original, não apenas para se contraporem àquilo que faz tanto mal, mas também e sobretudo para reparar o mal que tem sido feito às populações. Reparação. A reparação nós a entendemos como sendo o acolhimento do espírito, dizem as nossas constituições. Padre Bourgeois escreveu que esta expressão é a mais surpreendente e a mais nova, talvez a mais significativa. O espírito é o dom do ressuscitado. É a força do alto, que enfrenta e destrói o mal. Primeiramente no ser daquele que crê, a fim de configurá-lo a Cristo. Depois, ele opera a necessária reparação na alma, na mente, no coração do discípulo, até que ele se aproxime ou alcance a estatura de Cristo. Portanto, muito mais do que atos de reparação, embora eles conservem o seu valor, a vocação dos homens consagrados ao coração de Jesus compreende ingressar na dinâmica do acolhimento do Espírito, que os transforma desde dentro, eleva-os à capacidade de oferecer os seus corpos como hóstias vivas, santas e agradáveis a Deus, impedindo-os de se conformarem com o mundo, mas sim transformando-o. A reparação nas almas e na sociedade, como quer o nosso fundador, depende primeiramente da reparação no ser dos homens consagrados ao coração de Jesus. Sem isto, subsiste o risco deles constituírem uma entidade filantrópica, composta de sujeitos mais ou menos bem intencionados, parecida com uma ONG. Na homilia da missa de Pentecostes de 2019, diz o Papa Francisco: sem o Espírito, Jesus permanece uma personagem do passado. A Escritura é letra morta. O cristianismo é um moralismo sem alegria. A igreja é uma organização. A missão é propaganda. A comunhão é um esforço. Adoração. Há aproximadamente 60 anos, a adoração eucarística foi objeto de certo desuso. Depois foi rejeitada, desprezada e considerada imprópria. Mais recentemente, ela vem tornando-se mais aceite, mais frequentemente praticada. Embora pareça que ela vá recuperando o seu devido lugar, na verdade, ela carece de uma mais profunda e sólida compreensão da parte de clérigos, religiosos e leigos. Para aqueles que são consagrados ao coração de Jesus, por vontade explícita do Padre Deon, a adoração eucarística é a primeira opção apostólica. Confira Constituição número 31. E com razão, pois ela é o privilegiado tempo da acolhida do Espírito. Por um lado, é no tempo da adoração que o servo se prostra diante do seu Senhor, a fim de render-lhe graças, louvores e submissão à sua vontade. Por outro lado, é na adoração e a abertura ao Senhor e a acolhida do Espírito se realizam mais perfeitamente, preparando os ministros da reparação dos seres humanos e da sociedade. Naturalmente que isso compreende uma certa passividade, e é condição para ser atraído pelo crucificado ressuscitado. Com efeito, essa passividade entra em conflito com o incessante impulso que leva o homem contemporâneo à eficiência e à autossuficiência, que resulta no abandono da adoração. Louvado seja nosso Senhor Jesus Cristo.
Après cette méditation, prenons 2 à 3 minutes de silence. Merci. Maintenant, nous allons dire ensemble la prière de la 9e conférence générale en langue portugaise. Ensemble, Pai de amor e como falta de amor e revelação,
a vós os confiamos, com ministros da misericórdia e da reconciliação, que pelos Espíritos conduzir para o fiéis Maria, no compreendemos pela presença e testemunho, ao chamar a ti ao povo, a vencer a confiança para que atendamos os amores, a sede de esperança do povo, usamos esse motor da criação de uma sociedade mais justa, fraterna e solidária.
Amen. Cher Père, la journée d'hier nous a permis de commencer à creuser le premier objectif de notre conférence générale sur la passion du Père Déon. Nous avons redécouvert à travers les 2 vidéos sur l'engagement social du Père Déon et les 3 Léons, comment la passion du Père Déon s'enracine avant tout dans son amour pour le Sacré-Cœur. Nous avons symbolisé cela par notre désir de passer cet héritage à la prochaine génération par le jeu des briques. Aujourd'hui, nous nous pencherons sur le 2e objectif de notre conférence générale et nous serons guidés par les 3 mots-clés: identité, adorer et réparer. Il s'agira de réévaluer la relation entre notre adoration et notre mission. La méditation du Père Élie nous a bien introduit à l'objectif de cette journée. À travers différentes interventions et échanges, aujourd'hui, nous verrons comment notre mission contribue à la construction du règne de Dieu. Nous lisons dans nos constitutions, à la suite du fondateur, selon les signes des temps et en communion avec la vie de l'Église, nous voulons contribuer à instaurer le règne de justice et de charité chrétienne dans le monde. Constitution numéro 32. Dans son discours introductif, le Père général rappelait hier que notre conférence générale est le prolongement de la Lectio Divina des Béatitudes, une façon de redire que notre mission sociale s'enracine dans notre mission d'adoration. C'est d'ailleurs ce qu'exprime la base du logo de cette conférence générale, qui est une Bible ouverte. Nous commencerons donc par regarder une vidéo du pape François portant sur son homélie pendant l'Épiphanie 2021. Ensuite, nous prendrons du temps pour méditer en silence, de façon individuelle, sur son texte, le texte de son homélie, mais aussi nous serons accompagnés par un autre texte du Père Bourgeois sur l'adoration. Après cela, nous aurons une pause, puis suivra l'intervention de Peter Cardinal Turkson sur un aspect de l'enseignement social de l'Église, avec des échanges qui seront initiés par 3 confrères qui lui poseront chacun une question. C'est cela l'ossature de notre programme pour cette matinée. Je vous invite maintenant à regarder la vidéo du pape François qui nous introduira dans notre méditation sur l'adoration.
L'Evangelista Matteo sottolinea che i magi, quando giunsero a Betlemme, videro il bambino con Maria, sua madre, si postrarono e lo adorarono. Adorare il Signore non è facile, non è un fatto immediato, esige una certa maturità spirituale, essendo il punto di arrivo di un cammino interiore, a volte lungo. Non è spontaneo in noi l'atteggiamento di adorare Dio. L'essere umano ha bisogno, sì, di adorare, ma rischia di sbagliare oggettivo. Infatti, se non adora Dio, adora degli idoli. Non c'è un punto di mezzo, o Dio o gli idoli, o per usare una parola di uno scrittore francese, chi non adora Dio adora il diavolo. Invece, il credente diventerà idolatra. E questo è così, out. Nella nostra epoca è particolarmente necessario che sia singolarmente che comunitariamente dedichiamo più tempo all'adorazione, imparando sempre meglio a contemplare il Signore. Si è perso un po' il senso della preghiera di adorazione. Dobbiamo riprenderlo, sia comunitariamente sia nella propria vita spirituale. Oggi, pertanto, ci mettiamo alla scuola dei magi per trarne alcuni insegnamenti utili. Come loro vogliamo postarci e adorare il Signore. Adorarlo sul serio, no? Come ha detto Erode, ma fate dove è il posto e andrò io ad adorarlo. No, questa adorazione non va sul serio. Dall'odierna liturgia della parola ricaviamo 3 espressioni che possono aiutarci a comprendere meglio che cosa significa essere adoratori del Signore. Queste espressioni sono alzare gli occhi, mettersi in viaggio e vedere. Queste 3 espressioni ci aiuteranno a capire cosa significa essere adoratori del Signore. La prima espressione, alzare gli occhi, ce lo offre il profeta Isaia. Alla comunità di Gerusalemme, ritornata da poco dall'esilio e prostrata dallo scoraggiamento a causa di tante difficoltà, il profeta rivolge questo forte invito: alza gli occhi intorno a guarda. È un invito a mettere da parte stanchezza e lamentele, a uscire dalle strettoie di una visione angusta, a liberarsi dalla dittatura del proprio io, sempre incline a ripiegarsi su se stesso e sulle proprie preoccupazioni. Per adorare il Signore bisogna anzitutto alzare gli occhi, non lasciarsi cioè imprigionare dai fantasmi interiori che spengono la speranza e non fare dei problemi e delle difficoltà il centro della propria esistenza. Ciò non vuol dire negare la realtà, fingendo e illudendosi che tutto vada bene, no. Si tratta invece di guardare in modo nuovo i problemi e le angosce, sapendo che il Signore conosce le nostre situazioni difficili, ascolta attentamente le nostre invocazioni e non è indifferente alle lacrime che versiamo. Questo sguardo che, malgrado le vicende della vita, rimane fiducioso nel Signore, genera la gratitudine filiale. Quando questo avviene, il cuore si apre all'adorazione. Al contrario, quando fissiamo l'attenzione esclusivamente sui problemi, rifiutando di alzare gli occhi a Dio, la paura invade il cuore e lo disorienta, dando luogo alla rabbia, allo smarrimento, all'angoscia, alla depressione. In queste condizioni è difficile adorare il Signore. Se si verifica ciò, bisogna avere il coraggio di rompere il cerchio delle nostre conclusioni scontate, sapendo che la realtà è più grande dei nostri pensieri. Alza gli occhi intorno e guarda. Il Signore ci invita in primo luogo ad avere fiducia in Lui, perché Egli si prende realmente cura di tutti. Se dunque Dio veste così bene l'erba del campo, che oggi c'è e domani si getta nel forno, quanto di più farà per noi? Se alziamo lo sguardo al Signore e alla sua luce, consideriamo la realtà, scopriamo che Egli non ci abbandona mai. Il Verbo si è fatto carne e rimane sempre con noi, tutti i giorni, sempre. Quando alziamo gli occhi a Dio, i problemi della vita non scompaiono, no, ma sentiamo che il Signore ci dà la forza necessaria per affrontarli. Alzare gli occhi allora è il primo passo che dispone all'adorazione. Si tratta dell'adorazione del discepolo che ha scoperto in Dio una gioia nuova, una gioia diversa. Quella del mondo è fondata sul possesso dei beni, sul successo o su altre cose simili, sempre io al centro, no? Invece la gioia del discepolo di Cristo trova il suo fondamento nella fedeltà di Dio, le cui promesse non vengono mai meno, a dispetto delle situazioni di crisi in cui possiamo venire a trovarci. Ecco allora che gratitudine filiale e gioia suscitano l'anelito di adorare il Signore che è fedele e non si lascia mai soli. La seconda espressione che ci può aiutare è mettersi in viaggio. Alzare gli occhi, la seconda, mettersi in viaggio. Prima di poter adorare il bambino nato a Betlemme, i magi dovettero affrontare un lungo viaggio. Scrive Matteo. Ecco, alcuni magi vennero da Oriente a Gerusalemme e dicevano: dov'è colui che è nato, il re dei Giudei? Abbiamo visto spuntare la sua stella e siamo venuti ad adorarlo. Il viaggio implica sempre una trasformazione, un cambiamento. Dopo un viaggio non si è più come prima. C'è sempre qualcosa di nuovo in chi ha compiuto un cammino. Le sue conoscenze si sono ampliate, ha visto persone e cose nuove, ha sperimentato il rafforzarsi della volontà nel far fronte alle difficoltà e ai rischi del tragitto. Non si giunge ad adorare il Signore senza passare prima attraverso la maturazione interiore che ci dà il metterci in viaggio. Si diventa adoratori del Signore mediante un cammino graduale. L'esperienza ci insegna, ad esempio, che una persona a 50 anni vive l'adorazione con uno spirito diverso rispetto a quando ne aveva 30. Chi si lascia modellare dalla grazia solitamente col passare del tempo migliora. L'uomo esteriore invecchia, dice San Paolo, mentre l'uomo interiore si rinnova di giorno in giorno, disponendosi sempre meglio ad adorare il Signore. Da questo punto di vista i fallimenti, le crisi, gli errori possono diventare esperienze istruttive. Non di rado servono a renderci consapevoli che solo il Signore è degno di essere adorato, perché soltanto Lui appaga il desiderio di vita e di eternità presente nell'intimo di ogni persona. Inoltre, col passare del tempo, le prove e le fatiche della vita vissute nella fede contribuiscono a purificare il cuore, a renderlo più umile e quindi più disponibile ad aprirsi a Dio. Anche i peccati, anche la coscienza di essere peccatori, di trovare cose tanto brutte. Ma io ho fatto questo, ho fatto come? E questo, se tu lo prendi con fede e con pentimento, con contrizione, ti aiuterà a crescere. Tutto aiuta, dice Paolo più o meno, alla crescita spirituale, all'incontro con Gesù, anche i peccati. Anche i peccati. E Santo Tommaso aggiunge, ezia mortali, anche i brutti peccati, i peggiori. Ma se tu lo prendi con pentimento ti aiuterà in questo viaggio verso l'incontro col Signore e adorarlo meglio. Come immagini, anche noi dobbiamo lasciarci istruire dal cammino della vita, segnato dalle inevitabili difficoltà del viaggio. Non permettiamo che le stanchezze, le cadute, i fallimenti ci gettino nello scoraggiamento. Riconoscendoli invece con umiltà, dobbiamo farne occasione per progredire verso il Signore Gesù. La vita non è una dimostrazione di abilità, ma un viaggio verso colui che ci ama. Noi non dobbiamo in ogni passo della vita far vedere la tessera delle virtù che abbiamo. Con umiltà dobbiamo andare verso il Signore. Il viaggio verso colui che ci ama. Guardando al Signore troveremo la forza per proseguire con gioia rinnovata. Veniamo alla terza espressione, vedere. Alzare gli occhi, mettersi in cammino, vedere. L'Evangelista scrive, entrati nella casa videro il bambino con Maria, sua madre. Si prostrarono e lo adorarono. L'adorazione era l'atto di omaggio riservato ai sovrani, ai grandi dignatari. I magi in effetti adorarono colui che sapevano essere il re dei Giudei. Ma di fatto cosa videro? Videro un povero bambino con sua madre, eppure questi sapienti, venuti da paesi lontani, seppero trascendere quella scena così umile e quasi dimessa, riconoscendo in quel bambino la presenza di un sovrano. Furono cioè in grado di vedere al di là dell'apparenza. Prostrandosi davanti al bambino nato a Betlemme, espressero un'adorazione che era anzitutto interiore. L'apertura degli scrigni portati in dono fu segno dell'offerta del loro cuore. Per adorare il Signore bisogna vedere oltre il velo del visibile, che spesso si rivela ingannevoli. E lodi e i notabili di Gerusalemme rappresentano la mondanità, perennemente schiava dell'apparenza. Vedono e non sanno vedere. Non dico vedono e non credono, è troppo, no, non sanno vedere, perché la sua capacità è schiava dell'apparenza, è in cerca di attrattive, essa dà valore soltanto alle cose sensazionali, alle cose che attirano l'attenzione dei più. D'altro canto, nei magi vediamo un atteggiamento diverso, che potremmo definire realismo teologale, una parola troppo alta, ma possiamo dirla così, un realismo teologale. Esso percepisce con oggettività la realtà delle cose, giungendo finalmente alla comprensione che Dio rifugge da ogni ostentazione. Il Signore è nell'umiltà. Il Signore è come quel bambino umile, rifugge dell'ostentazione che è proprio il prodotto della mondanità. Questo modo di vedere che trascende il visibile fa sì che noi adoriamo il Signore spesso nascosto in situazioni semplici, in persone umili e marginali. Si tratta dunque di uno sguardo che, non lasciandosi abbagliare dai fuochi artificiali dell'esibizionismo, cerca in ogni occasione ciò che non passa, cerca il Signore. Noi perciò, come scrive l'Apostolo Paolo, Non fissiamo lo sguardo sulle cose visibili, ma su quelle invisibili, perché le cose visibili sono di un momento, quelle invisibili invece sono eterne. Che il Signore Gesù ci renda Suoi veri adoratori, in grado di manifestare con la vita il Suo disegno di amore, che abbraccia l'intera umanità. Chiediamo la grazia per ognuno di noi e per la Chiesa intera di imparare ad adorare, di continuare ad adorare, di esercitare tanto questa preghiera di adorazione, perché solo Dio va adorato.
Après cette belle méditation du pape François sur l'adoration, nous allons maintenant prendre un temps en silence, un temps vraiment, nous choisirons le cadre, ça peut être ici, ça peut être n'importe où nous méditerons sur le texte du pape François, mais nous recevrons aussi sur notre plateforme WhatsApp le texte du Père Bourgeois sur l'adoration. Donc nous allons utiliser les deux textes pour notre méditation ce matin. Et après, nous nous retrouverons ici à 11h pour la conférence avec le cardinal Turkson. Oui, juste pour nous rappeler que nous devons être ponctuels, et respecter un peu le temps, revenir ici un peu plus tôt pour que nous puissions commencer exactement à 11h. Bonne méditation.
Bene, ora come potete vedere ci sarà una lunga pausa, come avete sentito, questa lunga pausa fino alle 11 dove ascolteremo la conferenza del cardinale Turkson. In questa lunga pausa le persone, i partecipanti sono stati invitati a meditare sul testo di Papa Francesco di Bourgeois. È un'omelia di Papa Francesco che è tenuta al giorno dell'Epifania sul tema dell'adorazione, perché il tema dell'adorazione, riparazione e identità sarà il tema che contrassegnerà questa giornata. Quindi allora rimanete collegati con noi e ci vedremo tra circa un'ora.
che vengono predisposti, eccetera, eccetera. Dunque, le opere forti della provincia spagnola sempre hanno questa sensibilità, però dentro di un marchio, no, di una cornice legale che è obbligatoria per tutti.
Ok. No? All'interno di questa settimana il nostro ospite avrà anche un compito molto importante, impegnativo, che è quello di raccogliere un po' quello che viene detto e elaborare un documento, non lo so, qualcosa del genere, non so. La prima domanda che ti vorrei fare è questa: che impressione hai avuto rispetto ai lavori di ieri, alla prima giornata?
Sì, la prima impressione che ho avuto è stata un cambiamento nel stile, come dire, no? Ci sono provinciali o superiori maggiori, no? Più giovani, per così dire, no? Di altre occasioni che ho partecipato ai capitoli generali, c'è un cambiamento generazionale, no? E dunque il modo di impostare il pensiero, i riferimenti, le preoccupazioni mi sono sembrate un po' nuove, no? Diverse, e per questo sono contento, no? Mi ha fatto piacere, no? Dopo soltanto abbiamo avuto una prima giornata, dunque manca un po' più, no? Di tempo, sì, di estensione per vedere e valutare, no? Però questa prima impressione, no? Di un'impostazione nuova, di una visione nuova, io l'ho percepita negli interventi, no? Piuttosto particolari, no? Che sono stati, e anche in quello che veniva fuori dai gruppi, no? Sì, un stile, un modo di fare o di parlare, di pensare un po' diverso, no?
Grazie. Allora, un'ultima domanda che riguarda invece l'oggi, questa giornata. Se voi avete seguito questa mattina i lavori, ci sono 3 parole chiave che dovrebbero condurre un po' i lavori di oggi: la parola adorazione, la parola identità e la parola riparazione. Allora, rivolgo a te in maniera telegrafica, no? Quando tu senti queste 3 parole, come potresti spiegarlo in maniera molto semplice a chi è profano o non conosce il nostro linguaggio?
Sì, questo è un esercizio, a mio avviso, no? Di separare le parti di un tutto, no? Cioè, per capirci, per poter ordinare, poter offrire un stile, no? Di essere in chiesa, in società, di essere noi, no? Dunque, ovviamente identità è sempre una ricerca di cercare la nostra essenza battesimale che ci porta a una consacrazione che ha queste sfumature proprie che diventano servizio alla società e alla Chiesa, cioè questa capacità di riparare, no? Di avere questa sensibilità, di vedere che cosa è rotta, no? Che cosa ha bisogno di tornare a questa origine, a questa identità voluta da Dio, no? Dunque questa, no? Questa capacità, no? Di sapere chi siamo per sapere cosa dobbiamo fare e dunque andare avanti, no? Però sempre è questo, no? Un tutto che spezziamo per capirlo meglio, per dopo ricomporlo e andare avanti, no?
Allora, ti ringraziamo molto di questo tempo, ti abbiamo tolto tempo alla tua pausa, insomma, no? Però buon lavoro e ci vediamo tra pochi minuti di nuovo con un'altra intervista. Intanto vi lasciamo sullo sfondo questa bellissima immagine della cupola di San Pietro. Ci sentiamo tra pochissimo. Grazie.
Ciao, prego.
se l'abbiamo risolti. Allora Enzo è il superiore provinciale della provincia italiana settentrionale. Per chi non lo sa, in Italia ci sono 2 province, al nord e al centro-sud, quindi Enzo, intanto grazie di essere venuto qua.
Prego.
Allora, questa è una cosa molto semplice, noi vogliamo un attimino far conoscere sia i partecipanti ma alcune idee riguardo all'impegno sociale, no? Allora, la provincia italiana mi sembra che nel passato ha vissuto una epoca d'oro nell'impegno sociale, giusto? Ha prodotto molto, no? Allora, ti faccio questa domanda, rispetto al passato, alle opere sociali, tante opere sociali che sono state fatte, com'è la situazione oggi?
Ma la situazione attuale ci vede sempre impegnati in campo sociale, anche perché la convinzione in casa nostra, nella nostra provincia, è che l'impegno sociale è intimamente associato con la nostra vocazione. Fortunatamente, come religiosi dehoniani nella nostra provincia, abbiamo sempre avuto una formazione che non ha mai fatto una distinzione tra un aspetto spirituale e un aspetto apostolico, ma abbiamo sempre creduto, e così ci hanno formato, che una vera spiritualità o è una spiritualità incarnata o altrimenti può essere facilmente una forma di spiritualismo. Non è detto che sia così, ma penso che da un punto di vista personale questo sia un pregio della nostra formazione. Ci hanno sempre aiutato a capire che il Vangelo si deve incarnare nella vita e nell'impegno sociale. Per questo nella nostra provincia, fin dall'inizio, quando padre Deone è venuto in Italia, sono partiti i seminari che di per sé sono stati una forma di impegno sociale, perché hanno dato istruzione all'inizio del secolo XX che non era un'educazione assicurata per tutti. Ma subito dopo sono partiti i collegi, il villaggio del fanciullo, l'opera per gli orfani di guerra, e tutte queste forme di impegno sociale sono diventate una forma molto concreta di incontro con i problemi della nostra società, e quindi ci hanno visti sempre presenti sul versante sociale. Sì. C'è un altro aspetto molto importante, direi caratteristico della nostra provincia, che è stato quello delle edizioni dehoniane, che sono nate proprio al tempo del Concilio Vaticano II, per cui alcuni nostri confratelli, padre Franchini, padre Albiero, da una piccola rivista, Il Regno del Sacro Cuore, hanno fatto partire un impegno culturale che ha raggiunto un notevole livello.
Tanto è vero che questo livello ha segnato anche la Chiesa italiana, quindi, esattamente. Quindi l'impegno dei dehoniani in Italia ancora oggi si risente, e la chiusura delle edizioni dehoniani è stato per molti un trauma.
Esattamente, sarebbe stato interessante che fosse sentito un po' di più anche dalla Chiesa istituzionale italiana, ma questo qua non conta.
Sì, sono dinamiche, è vero. A proposito invece dell'attuale impegno sociale, no? Visto che c'è una fase di trasformazione anche dell'impegno sociale, i confratelli invecchiano e quindi ci sono sempre meno forze giovani, se tu ci dovresti indicare alcune perle dell'impegno sociale oggi dei dehoniani in Italia, cosa ci potresti dire?
Intanto penso che sia da sottolineare il fatto che con la chiusura spiacevole del centro editoriale delle edizioni dehoniane non è terminato il nostro impegno culturale, perché attualmente siamo presenti sulla scena della culturale italiana con delle forme diverse, che sono appunto Settimana News, che è un blog che continua questo impegno di attualità. Quindi una Chiesa che guarda al mondo e che dialoga con il mondo, sapendo cogliere quelli che sono i problemi e le sfide della nostra società attuale. E nello stesso tempo questo diventa una forma di impegno culturale che costa anche molto meno che non avere una casa editrice, ma non toglie l'efficacia anche di questo impegno culturale. Un'altra forma di impegno è Campus News, che è un altro blog che alcuni confratelli hanno aperto per seguire ed essere un punto di riferimento per il mondo universitario, quindi per tutti gli studenti universitari esiste anche questa opportunità. In un ambito diverso è l'impegno che oggi è emerso e sta emergendo di attenzione al mondo delle carceri. Abbiamo già 2 confratelli che dai rispettivi vescovi sono stati nominati cappellani diocesani per le carceri, che quindi seguono i carcerati e il mondo del volontariato che si occupa delle carceri. E questo in 2 diocesi, Bologna e Pisa, ma nella diocesi di Bologna e anche di Modena altri confratelli si impegnano nel mondo del carcere. Che cosa questo significhi? Mi sembra abbastanza evidente, nel senso che se c'è qualcuno, oggi come oggi, che ha bisogno di un sostegno, è proprio questa gente che vive il mondo del carcere. Ovviamente ha compiuto degli errori, li sta pagando, ma è tutto il mondo del carcere che avrebbe bisogno di una rivisitazione, una ricomprensione, proprio perché la pena non sia soltanto un giudizio e una punizione, ma sia un'occasione di redenzione e di poter ricominciare un cammino sociale vissuto in un modo un po' più liberante.
Certo, grazie. Poi sui nostri canali ufficiali vi daremo l'indicazione per accedere al sito di Settimana News di Campus, quindi grazie. Allora, 2 ultime brevissime domande ti vorrei fare. Allora, la prima domanda riguarda un po' la collaborazione con i laici. Si parla in questi giorni, o comunque, che l'impegno sociale senza i laici è quasi impensabile. Questo è vero anche per le opere che ci sono in Italia? Penso di sì.
Direi proprio di sì. Tant'è vero che le edizioni dehoniane fin dall'inizio sono partite in una stretta collaborazione con i laici, perché era impensabile che tutto questo lavoro potesse essere fatto soltanto da religiosi. E questa è stata un'avventura davvero bella, con anche un aspetto di illusione da parte nostra, nel senso che iniziando questa collaborazione stretta con i laici pensavamo che fosse possibile una condivisione molto più approfondita dei valori intimi della nostra azione sociale nel campo dell'editoria e della cultura. Di fatto questo non è da pensare come una cosa scontata, perché evidentemente quando uno entra in un campo di lavoro ha un'opportunità per lavorare, per mantenere la propria famiglia, ed evidentemente aspettarci che ci sia anche una condivisione completa, no, a tutto tondo dei nostri valori è chiedere anche un po' troppo. Però noi crediamo assolutamente nella forma di collaborazione con i laici, e l'esempio concreto lo vedremo, lo ascolteremo oggi anche quando arriverà padre Giuliano Stenico a parlarci della sua attività ormai quarantennale, perché dal 1982 che il CEIS ha cominciato ad agire in Emilia-Romagna soprattutto, ed è tutto improntato in un coinvolgimento dei laici nell'opera educativa e assistenziale.
Esattamente, padre Giuliano Stenico parlerà oggi pomeriggio alle ore 15. Ultima domanda telegrafica, che saremo tra poco in diretta con l'Aula. Allora, ovviamente i lavori sono iniziati ieri, no? Ma una tua prima impressione di questa partenza, di questo calcio d'inizio?
Allora, la mia prima impressione è che è sempre molto bello incontrarsi con tutti gli altri confratelli che provengono da ogni entità del mondo, perché io perlomeno ho l'opportunità di vedere che la mia visione del mondo e la percezione delle cose è arricchita da tante altre situazioni sparse nel mondo che sono diverse da quella italiana, per cui ascolto con molto interesse le esperienze degli altri, e devo dire che dopo aver ascoltato qualche intervento mi viene subito da pensare che la nostra attenzione parlando di apostolato e impegno sociale, dovrebbe avere l'accortezza di comprendere che essere operatori sociali è una cosa ed essere religiosi che operano nel sociale presenta qualche differenza, e su questi aspetti io credo che dovremmo approfondire maggiormente la nostra riflessione, perché altrimenti, se dobbiamo diventare soltanto degli assistenti sociali o degli operatori sociali, mi sembra che sia una cosa...
Grazie Enzo, questo è un punto molto importante e spero che in questi giorni effettivamente verrà fuori questa cosa. Grazie, allora ci collegheremo tra poco per l'Aula ad ascoltare la conferenza del Cardinale Turkson. Dovrebbe essere già arrivato, e grazie a voi. Grazie Enzo, e buona continuazione.
Grazie a voi. Tutto bene?
Il est 11 heures et nous allons poursuivre avec notre programme de cette matinée. Nous avons la joie d'accueillir ce matin son éminence, Peter Cardinal Turkson. Il est ghanéen et il est né le 11 octobre 1948 au Ghana. Après son ordination, le 20 juillet 1975, dans l'archidiocèse de Cape Coast au Ghana, il a poursuivi ses études ici à Rome, à l'Institut biblique pontifical, obtenant une licence en écriture sainte, puis a commencé à travailler sur sa thèse de doctorat de 1987 à 1992. Il est également titulaire d'un master en Theology and Divinity. Le 6 octobre 1992, il a été nommé archevêque métropolitain de Cape Coast, au Ghana. Il a été créé cardinal par le pape Jean-Paul II en 2003. Cardinal Turkson a été président du Conseil pontifical pour la justice et la paix du 24 octobre 2009 au 1er janvier 2017. Le pape François l'a nommé pour un mandat de 5 ans en tant que premier préfet du dicaster pour la promotion du développement humain intégral, qui a commencé ses activités le 1er janvier 2017, poste qu'il a occupé jusqu'au 23 décembre 2021. Il faut rappeler ici qu'il a bien d'autres casquettes que je ne saurais énumérer ici. J'ai eu moi-même l'occasion, comme étudiant, de suivre une de ses conférences de carême à l'Université pontificale Saint-Patrick en Irlande en 2015 avec Turkson, qui est un organisme de charité de la conférence épiscopale irlandaise qui œuvre surtout à l'étranger. Ce matin, il va nous entretenir sur le thème « La question sociale ». Entre parenthèses, Père Déon est devenu une question du développement intégral de la personne humaine. Son invitation ce matin répond à la dynamique de notre conférence générale qui porte ce deuxième jour sur la relation entre notre adoration et notre mission. Elle s'inscrit dans la recherche de la réponse à la question « Comment notre mission contribue-t-elle à la construction du règne de Dieu ?» Son Éminence a environ 45 minutes pour sa présentation et ensuite nous initierons un dialogue à travers un bref commentaire et 3 questions qui lui seront posées par 3 confrères. Le Père Joseph Faméré, supérieur provincial de l'Europe francophone, le Père Pascal Noudjom, supérieur provincial du Cameroun, et le Père Vienne Guyan, supérieur provincial des États-Unis. Maintenant, je passe la parole à son Éminence pour sa présentation.
Bon, merci bien pour la présentation. Et on peut faire un petit choix ce matin, soit pour continuer dans cette... quoi? Ça va? Okay. Dans cette langue de votre fondateur, c'est le français, ou bien de le changer dans une langue un peu barbare. Ce serait la langue, peut-être, avec toutes les excuses, la langue anglaise, peut-être. So, we could continue in French, but Father Steve, who did all the communication with me, suggested that would be, English would be very welcome. So that's what I want to do this morning. But in the discussion, I think we can go to any of the languages if you want. So, in the first place, I think I want to thank the Superior General and all of you members of the council for the invitation, which has made me part of this meeting this morning. Indeed, as I was saying, the superiors who came down to this hall, this venue is very well known to us in our diocese for several meetings and conferences that we've organized here in the past. And therefore, although we came here very often, but we knew it was the Dehonians, but a real knowledge about who they are and what they do, it was this invitation that kind of got me to try to understand and to know better your congregation. But nevertheless, I still do not pretend to be so exhaustive in my knowledge about the congregation and all. But a few things that I picked up is what has enabled me to carry on this conversation with you this morning, merely suggesting another way of looking at the social concern, the question of the social question or that Father Dehon put. Incidentally, as you all know, Father Dehon lived in a period of history in France, which did inspire a lot of other founders of religious congregations. Those of you from the United States will probably also know about the Brothers of the Holy Cross. Their founder also lived almost around the same period and made the same experience, out of which he also got the idea to start his own congregation. So briefly this morning, what I want to do is simply three small things. It will be to present the social question, the concern for social justice concern, or the social commitment as a legacy of Father Dehon. And then presenting this as a legacy, set it up within the context of the social movement in Europe at the end of the 18th century and at the beginning of the 19th century. At the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And within that context, try to say that the inspiration and the ideas that went through Father Dehon to create this foundation resonated with several other crucial figures that we know of in the church who promoted the church's engagement in the social area. As I mentioned, for example, Father Dehon's own knowledge and contact with Toniolo. Those very many of you who are Italians know the name of Toniolo from Italian, social settimana sociale and all the big celebrations over here. They're great founders of the so-called European Union, Adenauer, Schumacher, Monet, and De Gasperi. All of these were contemporaries as it were living pretty much in the same period as Father Dehon. And therefore, the concern for the social question was something that was felt generally in Europe at that time of history. So that broad context would be looked at. Then subsequently, I shall then root Father Dehon's social concern within the greater, seedbed, as it were, of the development of the church's own social teaching. Okay, that's when I shall be using a lot, the PowerPoint presentation, which can probably be boring because I think it was too detailed. But I'll try to make it short. But it will be an attempt to say that everything that was happening with Father Dehon had a certain resonated with things happening also within the church. And as you know, Father Dehon therefore became a big apostle of Rerum Novarum of Leo XIII because of the resonance between his own thought and what was happening in the church, to the point of even his nomination to what we now call the CDF, to control the faith and all of. So it was a very popular figure that had a lot of resonance. So we'll look at that development quickly, and then look at the principles that come out of this development, which we call the church's social teaching of the church or social doctrine of the church, the crucial principles, which in your own presentation on your website, you refer to as the key themes, of the church's social teaching. We shall look at that together. And then after looking at that together, I shall present a small chart about these principles, helping us to say, if we identify this principle, this is what it can get us to think about, and this is what it can get us to do, as a small guide, and conclude with a small reflection about fidelity, Okay, the faithfulness to the charism and to the gospel was a crucial thing for your meeting, and so we shall end with that kind of thing. So, briefly, this is what I like to do, and for that matter, I say, wish me luck. So the social context then, the social concern as the legacy of Father Leon Dion. Far better, you know this far better than I do. He is your founder and is your father, spiritual father. So born in 1843 and ordained a priest in 1868 till his death in 1920. Father Dehon therefore exercised his priestly ministry in the latter phase of the Industrial Revolution and its aftermath. All that the revolution brought about in society, especially in the area of the mechanization of work, the life of workers, ownership of property, rights and freedom of workers to organize themselves into unions, the use of capital, profit-making, usury, and all of these questions became alive in his day. The influence of these new developments on the social and religious life in France was manifest and palpable, and so was it also in the other nations around France. The Netherlands, Germany, Austria, and even Italy, all of them showed influence of these new things that were happening, new things which would then lead us to Rerum Novarum, all the new things which were happening. Within the church, this new development engendered a current of thought and action about living the faith in those changed times which would give birth to the social movements. They were to be found in France, in Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, and Spain. In these countries, the social movement engendered political parties, popularly known as the Social Democrats. But these parties were all offshoots of this movement to which Father Dehon belonged to, mostly under the name Christian Democrat, which endeavored to maintain their voice and the teaching of the church in those increasingly polarizing situations of the church and the emergence of a separation between the church and the state. So to understand all of this, we also need to know that the contemporaries of Father Dehon were, for example, Giuseppe Toniolo, I mentioned, and just if you know who Toniolo is for Italian social thought, you know who the companion of Dehon were. An economist, a sociologist, pioneer of the church of the Christian Democrats or Christian democracy, and supporter of an economic system in which social, judicial, and economic forces cooperate proportionate to uphold the status and the right of the worker. On the other hand was Alcide de Gasperi, 1881-1954, statesman and founder of the Christian Democratic Party of Italy. Jean Monnet, also industrialist, political visionary, and also a co-founder of the so-called European Union. Konrad de Adenauer, German, 1876-1967, a statesman, co-founder of the Christian Democratic Party of Germany. Robert Schuman. So all of these figures and activists belong to this same period in history in which Father Dehon lived. And the concern that they as Catholics and Christians tried to respond to was similar to what Father Dehon was faced and tried to grapple with. So, but by far the greatest influence on the life of Father Dehon was Pope Leo XIII and his encyclical letter about the new things, Rerum Novarum, of 1891. Besides Father Dehon's audience with Pope Leo, who encouraged him in his outreach towards workers, is to be noted. Pope Leo XIII's encyclical then began to energize and to galvanize political thinking and action of members of the Christian social movement into forming political parties. Only that later on, another encyclical of the Pope, Communi Gravitas de Commune, will kind of hold the brakes a little bit on these social democrats a little bit. But Father Dehon will become by far the big commentator and the promoter of Rerum Novarum in those days. As you can imagine, the emergence of Rerum Novarum divided also the church. Those who were pro-monarchy and friends of the industrialists against those who were working for the workers and pushing for their right, as it is even till today. So, Father Dehon then studied and wrote commentaries on the content of Rerum Novarum and its key themes in the journals that he started, Christian Social Manual, and then the Christian and the Social Catechism. And with that, Dehon became one of the Abbé Democrates, as you know, for whom Rerum Novarum was a magna carta for their social engagement. So in his general religious and socio-political setting of the 19th century, Father Dehon then cultivated a spirituality which gave meaning to concrete life. He enunciated the primacy of the spiritual, not in a disincarnate form of some ascetical school of thought, but within the problems of the present, such as those of the working class. His spirituality was based on the pierced heart of Jesus Christ crucified, contemplated and adored in the Eucharist, as the basis of a life of communion with the heart of Jesus and with the rest of the world. So this then will become the big hallmarks of spiritual traditions of this congregation. Devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus revealed in the form crucified, adored in the Eucharist, in adoration, Eucharistic adoration, and then the basis of a life of communion, which is begun to characterize the organization of your different groups, lay and religious and all around the different parts of the world. All of these key features are rooted in Father Dehon's spirituality. So his was a spirituality of self-sacrificing love. And it was this spirituality that drove Father Dehon to go to the peripheries of his day. This is an expression which has become popular with Pope Francis, to go to the peripheries. But the peripheries of his day were the factories and with the workers. These were the peripheries that Father Dehon would go to in his day, and then also to schools to meet with young students and try to speak and to talk with them. And finally, therefore, giving formation even to young priests about and encouraging them to learn to also go out, to reach out to the different priests and seminarians with the help of his colleague and friend Leon Hamel, with whom he would organize all of these. So in the industrial city of Saint Quentin, I hope I pronounce it right, Father Dehon saw the rise of the working class as a social phenomenon and the importance of the ministry of the church, faced with social and cultural reality of the epoch. Pro-monarchy and capitalist sentiments prevented part of the clergy, indeed part of the church, from seeing and responding to how much ordinary workers and the poor classes in the church were beginning to drift away from the church. For Father Dehon, then, a crucial principle which would be upheld by the church's social teaching was perceived and upheld by him, namely, the personhood or the personality of the human being is the supreme social principle of the church, a supreme social principle of the church's social teaching. And the free development of the human person is the central measure of any social order. To measure any social order, you need to just evaluate how that social order promotes the development of the personality or the dignity of people. For created in the image and the likeness of God, every human being, a man or a woman or a child, possess the dignity of personhood. And subsequent biblical teaching concerning brotherhood or sisterhood as the basis of the human family underlines the common dignity of all people. So it means then for Father Dehon that no person has more intrinsic dignity than the other person. Therefore, ideally, no human activity, and this is crucial for Father Dehon, no human activity of any kind may cause a deficit in basic human dignity for any person, be it impoverishment, enslavement, working conditions, privation of freedom of any kind. No human condition can cause a deficit in the dignity of any human person, and this will be the type principle that will drive him to want to go out in search of this. So this, in brief, I simply want to present is the legacy of Father Dehon. The social concern or the social question of Father Dehon may be seen, appreciated, described, and then set within this context in Europe. So if it is so set in the context of Europe, how is it set within the context of the church itself? And the development of this within the context of the church is what I like to briefly and quickly run through with the help of these slides, trying to suggest that this sentiment of concern for the poor, especially the working class, was something that was not just born and developed by Father Dehon, but was something that was rooted in scriptures, passed on through the fathers of the church, developed in the early life of the church into finally what will become the church's social doctrine from Pope Leo XIII on till today. So that is the thing that I like to look at now. Having looked at the social concern within the time, within the period of history of Father Dehon, we now want to situate this social concern within the life of the church, its ministry, and the development of this concept throughout history. And in so doing, I like to simply modestly suggest that through the ministry of the church and what is become now, we may widen the scope of the social concern of Father Dehon into concern for the social and integral human development of a person. And this will be parallel to what has happened also within the Curia. When I arrived in Rome in 2010, at the invitation of Pope Benedict, it was to take care of the Office of Justice and Peace. And as you know, at that time, we had a Council of Justice and Peace here, and there were commissions of justice and peace in all the dioceses. With Pope Francis, the justice and peace is merged with other people, giving now the development, essential development idea of integral human development. So we do not talk anymore singly about justice and peace, or the concern for justice or the social question, but now in the wider framework of integral human development. For justice and peace is part of the integral human development of the person, but not limited to it in the thing about labor conditions or whatever. It's now become a question which is environmental, which is economic, which is developmental, which is healthcare. All of these are now involved in any concern that we may have about the social question. So we look at the social question now not only to look at the worker conditions in the factory, but we're looking at it in the terms of the environment, in the terms of economics, in the terms of development, in terms of access to healthcare, in terms of access to education. It's become a wider concept now. So that to talk about social concern now means that we need to broaden a lot the horizon of the consideration. And that's what I quickly want to do with these slides. And I'll be rushing through it because I think since you have it on your computer, you later on have that thing and you can slowly and gradually go through it and find, about the thing, but I will be rushing through it. But you can take your time later on to look at it deeper. So where does it all begin? It begins with this thought expressed by Pope Francis, that a preoccupation with the social development of humankind is a theme which the Church took up and made her principal concern from the birth. A reflection of the meaning of authentic human life in history and in culture found expression already in the scriptures and in the writings of the church, fathers of the church, and is now taught by the church's magisterium as the social doctrine of the church. So 3 big moments: the rootedness of this social question within scripture, how it is presented in the church, the fathers of the church, to its development, and later on in history to the social doctrine of the church, is the thing that I quickly want to look at. So quickly in the scriptures, so the prophets, we know this. The prophets very much, talk about concern. What we now refer to as a preferential option for the poor. And Isaiah will say true fasting is what? True fasting is to take care of the poor, the clothed, the naked, and all of those. So the concern towards the poor, the needy in society, was already present in the scriptures. So the biblical term which sums this all up is the term of righteousness, the term of right judgment, tzedakah, mishpahat, all of them. But so the term of concern for the indigent and needy in society is a thing that was present in the church, to the point that the Sabbath institutions, for example, did not only regulate the worship of God on the 7th day, because the Sabbath is interpreted by Deuteronomy, for example, as a celebration of liberation from slavery. So in Deuteronomy chapter 5:15, the Sabbath was not 7 days of rest. The Sabbath was rather a celebration of the liberation of the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt for a life of freedom. And therefore, the Jubilee year developed out of this, and the focus and the concern again was for the poor in society, how to be of reference to them. So this then would underlie Jesus' own ministry, as when he would stand in the synagogue in Nazareth in Luke chapter 4, to say, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, anointed me to bring good news to the tithing of the poor and all of those. And so throughout the whole ministry of the life of Jesus, this is what will come out. He will not only be preaching the gospel, but also attending to the needs, the concrete needs of his people. This will lead us to recognize one thing, that Jesus did not only call for faith, but he called for something more than faith. To persons that Jesus healed, he said, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. But Jesus also asked for something more. For not those, he would say, who say to me, Lord, Lord, will be saved, by those who do the work of my Father. And what is this work of the Father? So something more is required than faith. Faith must lead to work, as St. James will later on identify this clearly to us and in a harvest understand. So faith goes together with the works, so that the works explain and justify the faith of people, and the faith itself engenders, what we do. Okay, in Matthew we can read about it. So Jesus' own ministry then invites us to consider, put the two things together, faith and works. And insert in two things which are not separable, just that the character of works increasingly would take the form of our concern for social issues, our concern for the needy in society, our concern for the poor, till the multiplied and expanded sense of the poor that we have these days. So in the church's own teaching, this will develop into a different works of mercy, the corporal works of mercy, or the diaconia in the early church, taking care of the poor, taking care of the needy, taking care the migrants and people in need in different situations. So we end up then by saying that the wisdom and the virtues of the revealed kingdom presented in the sayings and the parables of the gospel greatly inspired the early Christians. So the first generation Christians were mostly poor, displaced people. The first Peter called them paroikoi, as it were resident aliens or migrants of some sort. But they were seen also as objects of God's special love, and so the type of thing that we will now call this the preferential option for the poor. And it is this that the early church fathers will begin to draw attention. So from scriptures, we look quickly at the church fathers. Therefore, Clement of Rome would exhort his faithful, let the strong take care of the weak, let the weak respect the strong, and let the rich man minister to the poor. Let the poor man give thanks to God that he gave him one through whom his needs might be satisfied. He goes on, what we have, our strength, our wealth, and everything, is seen as a gift from God to be used for the body of Christ. And a century later, Justin the Martyr would encourage wealthy Christians to voluntarily give money to a common fund to help the sick, the widows, the needy, and so on. And in the 3rd century, Tertullian, for example, in his days, Christians would make voluntary offerings monthly to feed the poor, bury the dead, and feed orphans, the elderly, and even victims of disaster such as shipwreck. So, what we read about in the Acts of the Apostles beginning also to manifest itself in the church fathers and what they thought the church should be like. Now, when in latter periods the generosity of Christians began to wane, some church fathers insisted on property as intended by God for all of humanity. We already begin to step into Rerum Novarum. Accordingly, for example, Chrysostom would teach private property would question, and he would teach that when one attempts to possess oneself of anything, to make it one's own, then contention is introduced, as if nature herself was indignant. Why? Because according to Chrysostom, everything that we possess is ultimately to be used to sustain the needy ones in society. They don't mention it at this stage, but the concept of the common good is already beginning, as it were, to make itself felt in their thinking. Similarly, Ambrose would teach that nature has poured forth all things for men, for common use. Therefore, nature has produced a common right for all, but greed has made it the right of a few. And so on and on and on. In the church fathers, we'll see all of this happen. And then, as it were, there is this big summary created by a church historian called Carl Bill Meyer, which talks about how the church in the early medieval period took care of several issues, organized a lot of things in society. It was, as it were, practically the government of those days, taking care of the needs of people, including even defense systems of cities. So he would end up by saying that aid to the poor, slaves, prisoners, and travelers had become their concern. A portion of the church's income was reserved for assistance to the poor. And in large cities such as Constantinople and Antioch, the church's work with the poor was to a great extent highly organized. From these concerted efforts, I hope the microphone thing works too. Okay. I hope so the church's work with the poor was to a large extent, highly organized. From these concerted efforts, a number of institutions have emerged. for the relief of all human needs, hospitals, housing for the poor, orphanages, and all. And so, rushing through this, this early thing takes us now to the magisterium of the different popes. And so, animated by the church's faith and charity, this thinking about the concern for social issues have continued within the church. And it continued to inspire several people. We've seen how the social movements of Europe were born, and how these social movements gradually inspired people within the church till the formulation of this in Pope Leo XIII's encyclical Rerum Novarum, who takes up the misery of the workers during the Industrial Revolution, addressing their needs and all, and which then will become the big thing that Father Leon, for example, will take up and present. From here on, when you have a chance to look at this, you see how the different popes all fit into this social agenda of the church and add and develop it in their own way. So Leo the Great drew attention to new things, new challenges to society for which the church needs to come with solutions and address, and talked about property, talked about rights of workers to organize, and they've talked about concern for well-being needed in society. The different popes were built on this. John the 23rd will be crucial in this, because in Martel and Magistra, John the 23rd, talking about the need for people in society, would introduce the crucial concept that would develop into the integral human development idea. John the 23rd would say that development is not limited to only one single phase or feature of the human life. Christian, it must be something that embraces all aspects of the human person. And one, to sum up the teaching of John the 23rd in this regard, it is that the recognition that the development of the human person needs to be truly human, complete and whole, was first made by Pope John the 23rd in Martel et Magistra. With that recognition, he introduced into the church's social teaching the new concept of integral human development, which did inspire the fathers of the Second Vatican Council to speak about the whole development of the human person and about its integral vocation, to which culture must be subordinated in Gaudium et Spes. After the Second Vatican Council, and in the light of decolonization and the emergence of new national states in the developing world, St. Paul VI defined the integral human development of people as not consistent merely in material and economic growth. For Paul, this meant that integral human development referred to solidary development of people, which is rooted in transcendental humanism. Think about Jacques Maritain, because it places at its center the true meaning of human life and cultivates the social meaning of brotherhood between people. Therefore, overcoming mistrust and fear between people, integral human development emphasizes solidarity, integral development of people, and becomes a new pathway for peace. So this then will become the concept that I'll try to trace from this point on in the development, how the different popes add on to this. Paul VI developed this, and John Paul II will take it up and expand on this, and John Benedict XVI will take it up, expand on this, till Francis would give it its final form. So that between Benedict XVI and Pope Francis, it's possible to talk about integral development as rooted in integral ecology, meaning ecology of nature, ecology of the human person, ecology of society, ecology of peace. The well-being of the human person is related with all of these and will be a thing then to look at. So rushing through this, I like to sum it all up with this. So for Pope Francis then, the very concept of a person born and matured in Christianity helps in the pursuit of a fully human development, because
person means relation, not individualism. It affirms inclusion, not exclusion, unique and inviolable dignity rather than exploitation, freedom and coercion. And the church never tires of offering this wisdom and a work in the world. So we have a sort of, we may then put it all together from Pope Paul VI to Francis would say that between the Pope who opened the Vatican Council and the Pope who closed it, an idea about the development and the flourishing of the human person is born, which subsequent popes developed to feed into the creation of a dicastery of the Holy See called Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, which became a transformation of the Dicastery for Justice and Peace, inviting us to widen the sense of reference to the thought about concern for social issues and making it bigger and relate social issues to the different aspects of the growth and the development of the human person. So this holistic approach is the context that I like to offer to the social concern of Father Dehon. And therefore, the social teaching is something you look at. So we'll talk about then development is holistic. Development is for all people. It's about every aspect of the human person. And it is about, it comprises the care for the environment, the care for the person, true sense of anthropology, if you want, to proper understand of what the human person is good and all. So that being the sense of development, integral human development, as a new setting, as it were, for considering the social concern, I like then to pass on to the principles and the key themes that you yourself, the congregation has identified and uses as a guide. So from the point of view of the church's social teaching, the principles are this: dignity, or the personality of a person. That's about the dignity of all people. And this dignity is something that does not belong to one person, but belongs to all people, and so it is the common good of all. If it is the common good, then its creation or its realization is the responsibility of all, and that gives rise to solidarity. We need to act in solidarity to promote the common good which belongs to all. And when we need to act in solidarity to promote what is common to all of us, then it becomes necessary that the stronger elements in society help the weaker element in society to be able to make a contribution. And that becomes subsidiarity. Okay, everybody enabled, as it were, to be able to make a contribution to the common good. And subsidiarity, therefore, sometimes leads to the other concept of participation, delegation, and so on. And ultimately will become that thing about the universal destination of the goods of the earth and all, with a concern for the poor. And so these are concretely articulated by the key themes that you have, the 7 themes that you have to guide your social action: sacredness of life related to dignity, the call to family, community, and all, that's related to a sense of solidarity and the social concern. Then the human rights issue that derives from the dignity of people, preferential option for the poor that derives from subsidiarity, helping the weak ones to be able to make their contribution to everything that you have in society, and so on. Now, when it is so, how do we concretely carry this out? The principles need to be put into action, and that's why I like to propose this small guide. When we take, for example, the first principle of dignity, then dignity involves us to exercise in freedom, entailing duties as well as rights. So this is the implication of dignity, or the personality of whatever. And what does that lead to? It means that human freedom is enhanced or degraded to the extent that we uphold dignity. All human rights are fully respected or disrespected when we promote dignity. Opportunities are offered to people to realize themselves or not when we promote dignity, and so on. When we talk about common good, what are we talking about? This is the shared milieu within which initiatives cannot be taken nor benefits received. And what is that? When that is the case, what are the concerns we have? Are social values uplifted or are they neglected? How specifically does the community benefit from what happens? Or there's a participation included or necessary or excluded. So we go through this for all the different principles of social doctrine of the church. They're not simply principles stated, but principles stated, they are concrete sense and application given, and what it challenges or invites us to do. And I propose this as a possible guidance or framework for widening the sense of social concern into a sense of integral human development, which is promoted or realized by the church's social teaching, would invite us to concrete action. And I suggest the concrete action that this invites us to can benefit from the implications that these social principles, as it were, reduced or presented as a kind of a guide. Elsewhere, we presented this to the world of business people, inviting them to see how the challenge affects their business. But in this case, we're looking at the social ministry or the social concern of the congregation, and even there, looking at dignity, its implications and all, is stuff that I think we can consider. I think we have 2 minutes, and with that 2 minutes, we'll simply conclude on something a little bit, So all of us, a kind of ethic of social concern. The ethic of social concern is fidelity to our mandate, fidelity to our charism, fidelity to the gospel. And with this, I just like to present this image that we find in Matthew. Jesus puts a rhetorical question in Matthew chapter 24. Who then is the faithful and prudent servant, whom his master places over all his whatever? A question put, not answered. And so that gets us all to always start looking for the faithful and the prudent servant. Where can we find him? And what are the features that we can find in such a faithful and prudent servant? I'd like to suggest that an indication for identifying who this is, in the light of the fact that all of us gathered here, major superiors and all, with mandate, with the task of overseeing promoting the practice of all this in our communities. I'd like to draw attention to the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 3 and 4, probably help us solve who the faithful and the prudent servant is. And in Hebrews chapter 3 and 4, we'll be reading about 2 people. It will be saying that Moses was faithful in God's household, just as Jesus was faithful as a son. Moses was faithful as a servant. Jesus was faithful as a son. So the faithfulness we're talking about, we read about Moses and we read about Jesus. How were these faithful? They were faithful in the household of God as a servant and as a son. And what does that mean? The word used for faithful over there is not just being true to something, but it is worthy of trust. Anybody who is faithful in the doing of anything is somebody who is worthy of trust. Worthy of trust before God, worthy of trust before people. When superiors are said to be faithful in anything, then it means that they are faithful not only before the one who entrusted them with authority and status, but they're also faithful before the people who need to surrender themselves to their leadership and their rule. And so these are the 2 senses of faithfulness. Worthy of trust. Worthy of trust of the person who made you, whatever we are, and worthy of trust to the people who need to follow our leadership. And when we so are considered faithful, it is in that light. So the concern for this conversation this morning was the Dehonians, faithful to the gospel and faithful to
to their legacy or the social concern. And that's just what it is, to be found worthy of trust, of the gospel which inspired Dehon with the spirituality to be able to respond to the needs of the poor. What we're saying is that the needs of the poor is not simply workers, but it's not a bigger thing about the development of the human person. And we have guidelines to do that, and it is. With that I like to probably draw the curtain. I've already exceeded my time. So I'd like to thank you for your kind attention, for everything that we've been able to share. Thank you.
Merci, Votre Éminence. Maintenant, nous allons initier un échange entre le cardinal et nous ici, mais nous allons le faire à travers 3 confrères, comme je l'ai annoncé tantôt. Donc, ce sera une réaction, ça peut être une réaction, ça peut être une question, mais surtout que cela soit vraiment bref. Donc, je commencerai par le Père Joseph Faméré, supérieur provincial de l'Europe francophone, qui va faire soit une observation, soit une question, et cela va nous engager dans le débat. Vous avez la parole, Père.
Merci. To start, just some words in English before I continue in the language of the founder of our congregation. First of all, Eminence, I would like to thank you very much for your rich paper, both on the social concern of Father Dehon and on the Catholic social doctrine or theology. Je continue en français. Comme je viens de l'indiquer, vous avez commencé par rappeler la préoccupation de justice sociale et l'engagement social du Père Dehon. Puis, vous avez montré le développement du discours social de l'Église jusqu'aujourd'hui, en enracinant celui-ci dans les Écritures et dans la patristique. Ce qui me paraît particulièrement important, ce qui m'a particulièrement plu, et que je comprends mieux maintenant que je sais que vous êtes bibliste de formation, cet enracinement biblique et patristique me paraît effectivement indispensable pour fonder la doctrine sociale de l'Église, ou plus largement, la doctrine anthropologique du christianisme. Je le souligne, car lorsqu'on parle du discours social de l'Église, on pense souvent avant tout, voire uniquement, au magistère des papes depuis Léon XIII. Je dois me limiter à une question, alors voici celle que je choisis. Votre présentation était intitulée « The social question, Father Dehon, has become a question of integral human development ». Effectivement, le développement humain intégral propose une vision plus holistique qu'une préoccupation sociale étroite qui ne s'intéresserait qu'au statut de l'employé dans son entreprise ou aux aspects économiques de cette situation. Aujourd'hui, s'y ajoute notamment la prise en compte de la question écologique, la sauvegarde de la nature, la sauvegarde de la création. Pour vous, personnellement, quel est l'apport nouveau, l'apport spécifique de cette question écologique à la question sociale classique? Je vous remercie déjà pour votre réponse.
Donc, nous allons suivre d'abord les interventions avec des questions et le cardinal Turkson va répondre à la fin. Donc, maintenant, je donne la parole au Père Nguyen, provincial des États-Unis, supérieur provincial des prêtres du Sacré-Cœur des États-Unis, pour une réaction, un commentaire, une question.
Thank you very much, Cardinal Turkson, for your presentation. Some time ago, I read an article about you being the next Pope from Africa. So it's an honor to respond to your talk, to reflect on your presentation. You provided a very holistic and integral It might be a blessing to the church in Africa, Cardinal, yes. So you provided a holistic, integral reflection on the Catholic social teaching. And as you pointed out in your presentation, Father Dehon's social commitment is deeply rooted in the social teaching of the church. And first, the church's social teaching is rooted in sacred scriptures, and social justice begins with God. The Hebrew prophets announced God's special love for the poor, and they call God's people to a covenant of love and justice. The prophet Micah, for example, reminded people that God demanded the people to do justice, to love kindness, and walk humbly with God. And the Catholic social teaching is rooted in the life and ministry of Jesus. He came, according to the Gospel of Luke, he came to bring glad tidings to the poor, liberty to captives, and recovery of sight to the poor. And second, the Catholic social teachings is rooted in tradition from the time of the early church to the time of the church fathers and to our present time. So in your presentation, you touched on the interconnectedness, interrelatedness, and interdependence of people and creation. And this reminds me of the writing by Pope Benedict XVI in Spes Salve. He wrote, "No man is an island, entire of itself. Our lives are involved with one another. Through innumerable interactions, they are linked together. No one lives alone. No one sins alone. No one is saved alone. The lives of others continually spill over into mine. In that, I think, say, and achieve. And conversely, my life spills over into that of others for better and for worse. And so we are one human family, or as we are one body, according to St. Paul. And so Scripture also tells us to live in right relationship with others, with ourselves, and with God. And as Pope Paul VI reminded us, if you want peace, work for justice. And so our love for God demands that we promote God's shalom in our world and work for justice and peace. So my question for you is, Cardinal Turkson, the industrial revolution of the 19th century left a lasting impact on the poor. And it appears that another revolution is in the making, that is the advances of automation, artificial intelligence, and other emerging technologies. The fear is that the poor will be left out of this revolution. They might have limited access to job and equality. So has the church, according to you, as Cardinal, has the church been actively trying to offer her wisdom, or has been trying to influence this revolution to protect and assure and promote the dignity and integral development of the human person? So thank you.
Merci, Père. Nous passerons maintenant au Père Pascal Nugent, supérieur provincial des prêtres du Sacré-Cœur du Cameroun, pour sa réaction, un commentaire, une question.
Firstly, I would like to thank the preparation committee for giving me the opportunity to be one of the 3 chosen to react to this lecture of the Cardinal Peter Turkson. Secondly, to thank the Cardinal Peter for his penetrating reflection that we just had. I personally found the presentation very inspiring for us Dehonians, not only because it tackles issues relevant to the church understanding of social commitment, but as well because it contextualizes it in the jargon proper to our charism and spirituality, as we have received it from Father Dehon and our Dehonian traditions. The Cardinal acknowledges, as we do through this conference, that one of the greatest legacy from Father Dehon is social justice concerns or social commitment. I found it very inspiring and deep, the diachronic reading, the presentation offer of the concept of the human development as it transpires in the scriptures, the church fathers, and the magisterium of the popes. I think one thing is constant through the tradition of the church and the magisteriums of the popes: the centrality of Christ as the response to the man's inner quest and the holistic approach to the development of the human person. In Redemptor Omnis 87 and 88, John Paul II claimed that Jesus Christ is the chief way for the church and the way to each man. And further, in the same encyclical, he says that man is the primary route that the church must travel in fulfilling her mission. He is the primary and fundamental way for the church, the way traced out by Christ himself, the way that leads invariably through the mystery of the incarnation and the redemption. The expose of Cardinal Peter tells us that the way our mission contributes to building the kingdom of God is in Christ through the human person, developed in the totality and integrity of itself. Having said the above, let me land to my question with a double concern. Dear Cardinal Peter, you said man does not develop through his own powers, nor can development simply be handed to him. In reality, institutions by themselves are not enough because integral human development is primarily a vocation, and therefore it involves a free assumption of responsibility in solidarity on the part of everyone. These are my concerns. First, you say development cannot be handed to man unless we drive him in the dynamic of being partner in the building and the making of his personal self. You coined it with the expression responsibility and solidarity. But how do we achieve that when we know all the difficulty we face in evangelizing him? Second, in the social arena, some of the concepts we concretely struggle with are those related to means and ends. As congregations throughout the world struggles to carry out their mission through project building and fundraising, the danger of instrumentalization of the person is ever present. How do we escape this trap? Thank you.
How do we escape there?
The trap. The trap.
Okay.
Which trap is this? I missed that trap.
I beg pardon?
The trap.
I mean, the trap of falling into instrumentalizing the human person.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
when the person is no more seen as an end, but a means, for example, of what we do.
Okay. Okay, so thanks. These are all three issues are good issues for, if anybody here is preparing or thinking about doing a thesis on the social doctrine. So the first one about the ecological contribution to the social question. We can probably look at that starting from how Pope Francis invites us to look at the ecological question with reference to a common home. The reference to the earth, not as simply creation, but as a common home, it gives us a very useful point of reference for the ecological implications for a sense of the social question. It just means that everything that happens to the earth happens to a common home, the home of the human person, which just means that it can be something. If the home is destroyed, then everybody is on the road, everybody is on the street, everybody is thrown out, the livelihood and all of that. So the concept common home provides a very useful sociological context for the consideration of the possible impact of ecology on this. Incidentally, as some of you may know, we were invited to help with the draft of the Lobato Si at one point. And although we have resisted the questioning of journalists to answer how much of the original draft made it to the final whatever, we've always said we forgot. we don't remember what it is, but it's simply because we know, some of you from US, you know about George Weigel, right? George Weigel, for example, takes Caritas in Veritate, and he says that from his knowledge of Pope Benedict, he knows what came from Pope Benedict and what came from other hands. We don't want to give that chance to anybody to say we know what came from Francis and what came from whatever, so we simply say we don't remember. And that's what it is now. But one thing that I can say is that the title, Care for Our Common Home, was right from the beginning, part of the title. And the invitation to consider the ecological issue in terms of a home for humanity was intentional, an invitation to look at not creation as some abstract whatever thing out there, but something in which we live, something that is so close to us. Therefore, how does the ecology contribute to this? Several. Again, the question that right now we're talking about the climate crisis. Okay, that's what took us to Glasgow and all of that. Before that, in COP21 in Paris, it was the thing about rising temperatures. You may have heard already over the weekend, although in winter, California had 27 degrees Celsius. Okay, summer temperatures and winter conditions and all. So we're having all of these imbalances with floods, with whatever. So manifestations are on us. The implication of this, therefore, the impact of this on the human person is increased poverty. Look at the situation in Madagascar with all the 2 typhoon floods that has happened, or Mozambique, or even when it hits any place, even in the United States. So the situation is an increased impoverization of the human person as a result of the disasters which do occur. And so the common home is constantly under threat. And when our home is under threat, it just means that poverty is enhanced, insecurity is upon us. We're likely to become migrants thrown on the street, in search of either proper environment from the Sahel, the dryness of the lack of water and all of that helps throw people on the street. So the impact of the environment on the living condition of the human person is huge. That is what explains the concern now, of Pope Francis with Lobato Si, the IPCC, International Protocol for Climate Change, the different COPs that are still happening. All of that is to ensure this. And here in Europe now, the question of migration is not unrelated with the question of ecological crisis. Okay, at least we know this from the Sahel. We know this from Ethiopia, the southeastern corner, and then part even from now, part of Syria. So that's the term ecology and the social question. The second one about artificial intelligence as introducing a new revolutionary period in history. That is true, that is real. Related to this are several other dimensions. Over the weekend, I was invited to a webinar on neuroscience, the application of artificial intelligence to the human brain and what it can do. Okay, if a vital organ of the human person can now be brought on the technology, then the risk is the human person itself. What would human person be in the future when his brain can be introduced with algorithms and be controlled by whatever type of thing? So it's a thing of big concern. In any case, so how is the church positioning itself to safeguard the well-being of the poor in the face of artificial intelligence? Like all technology, artificial intelligence is ambivalent. It has positive sides and it has negative sides. The negative sides are these challenges that we talk about, but there are positive sides. Its application in medicine, its application in therapy and cures, its application in instruments that promote well-being. For example, Mohammed Yunus, with his big revolutionary thing in Bangladesh and all of that, it's because what people can do with a mobile phone in their hands. That enables them to make investment, to transfer money, to transfer cash and all of that. So it's helping change the orbit of existence of a lot of poor people. That is happening. In Kenya, East Africa, a new type of industry is emerging from the use of mobile phones to transfer money and to stimulate business. So all of that is happening. The use of artificial intelligence instruments on satellites to help to discover hidden whatever things in the air to stop that has been out there. But at the same time, the challenges are there. And one of the big challenges which we realize now, even in the COVID period, is the increasing gap between the rich and the poor as a result of artificial intelligence. You know that the 4 companies which were listed as having doubled their income in the COVID crisis are all people who are in this business. Okay, Facebook, Twitter, these are the people who are making the big gains. So the challenge is there. What can the church do? Our dicastery commissioned the work that is being done by a group in France, which is titled, Human Well-Being Index, Determining Human Well-Being Index Through Artificial Intelligence. One Father Eric Solabir in Paris has got a group that is working on this to help us determine the application of this for ensuring well-being of poor and affected communities. Here in the Vatican, we have an initiative called the Minerva Group. The Minerva Group is a group that invites artificial intelligence from the Silicon Valley who come and gather in Minerva, the place, the Pontifical Academy, the spot there, to talk about the ethical concerns that artificial intelligence brings up, and to see how the church can accompany artificial intelligence with ethical considerations. So the Minerva Group is in charge of that. And with Austria, we also enter with a group of scholars who are also researching into this. So we are accompanying the development a little bit. Okay, and our accompaniment of the development is to be able to offer some ethical guidelines so that it doesn't become simply AI developed for money, but AI developed for the well-being of the human person. So that is something that we're looking at, and putting emphasis on the application of this for the well-being to transform the economic conditions of people and medical and sanitary use of all of this equipment. The third question actually was two, right? There were two questions put together. So the first one was, Pope Benedict had said that integral human development is a vocation. Okay, not handed to people, but it's a vocation that needs to be developed, and that calls for, therefore, all people coming together to develop this. Pope Benedict talks about integral human development in terms of a vocation, because this is something he says in Caritas in Veritate. And in Caritas in Veritate, the first line of Caritas in Veritate roots integral human development in the love that Jesus manifests to humanity with his own passion and death and all of that. So it's like saying that integral human development cannot be really accomplished without the motivating factor of love. Okay, love is so very basic to this, and that's what Jesus contributes to this. So when integral human development is a vocation, it means it responds the vocation to love. The vocation of everyone to love, and so a group of people coming together, and gratuitousness is a principle that he talks about to promote all with the exception of love. So it's something that corresponds to our nature, and it tells us that he also tells us that it's something that each one has to do from within. It's part of our nature. It's part of our nature, created to be able to flourish. And it goes on to say that the lack of development is lack of ideas. Okay, lack of development is lack of ideas, and the need to promote ideas, so people can flourish and develop. So integral development as a vocation stresses the fact that integral development is part of the creation of the human person. It's part of creation of man in the image and likeness of God. It's got within it a seed that just needs to blossom. And it blossoms to the extent that it yields to the challenges and invitation of love of God shown by the other and shown by the individual towards the other person. Then the possibility of falling into a trap. So the trap was, again, I'm trying to remember. You defined a trap, right? What was it again? You remind me again. The trap
was instrumentalization.
Okay, instrumentalization of the human person. This again has been a threat, okay, for development. We talk about instrumentalizing the human person means what? Using it for gain. It's one. Using of a chain supply chain can also reduce the human person to just an element of production. When people have to work to make a living, but work also is an expression of the dignity of the individual. When work does not promote the dignity of an individual, but is reduced to simply making a salary, then that also becomes reductive. So instrumentalizing is reducing, making the human person become just a clog in the chain, or as it were in a machine that simply makes profit without regard for its dignity, without regards to its well-being, and its own sense of responsibility towards family and every other person that is dependent upon him. This, though, is very real. When we talk about child labor, it's that problem of that trap. When we talk about women labor, it's part of that trap. When we talk about people in supply chains which are not considered as part of that trap. Therefore, two things that we need to note in this regard. When Pope Francis came to the Vatican, he brought with it the popular movements. The popular movement is a big movement in Latin America, importantly. And the popular movement just stresses the fact that if the human person is not to be reduced to simply an instrument, whatever, then you just need to take care of three things. When a person is working, so his right to work, decent work is one. His right to a roof over his head, a decent household, and a right to land. So the three things are, they talk about techo, trabajo, tierra. No? Are the three things that they talk about to uphold the dignity of the human person. Decent work, decent wages, and decent livelihood are three things that they talk about. Therefore, when in 2012 we developed a small booklet called The Vocation of the Business Leader, one of the things that we push for and advise all business leaders to try to take into consideration is that as business people, they should aim at three things. Providing good work. Not simply work, but work which is good. And work which is good means that it ensures the dignity of all the workers. Then it should also ensure good products. Every factory, every industry must produce good things. And good products means that products with, expiry date cannot be just tomorrow. Okay, and product that serve the well-being of the human person. Brothels, that's a business, but doesn't serve the well-being of a human person. Drug, whatever, pushing drugs or drug, whatever, trafficking, is also a job, but doesn't serve the well-being. So work should not simply be good, but the work should produce good, good goods. And finally, the wages or the salary or the income or the wealth that jobs produce should also be equally distributed. So good work, good products, and good profits. And these are three things that we encourage business people to look at by way of avoiding that the human person is instrumentalized in all of these things.
Thank you, Your Eminence. Looking at the time, I'm going to take two more reactions or questions. Father Augustinus.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. The first social teaching of the Church, in my opinion, proclaims the respect of human life, and one of the most fundamental needs of the world distorted by greed and selfishness. And in addition, if we look to the work of Jesus in the world, which is recorded in the scripture, we could feel strongly the sense of social aspect. In this kind of very fundamental needs and very close with the identity and vision of Jesus, I'm very surprised that the Church just started to have Rerum Novarum. I think this is the first social teaching of the Church in 1891. So I think this is also in our groups yesterday. We think that this is too late, the Church, to think about social teaching. So the question is, what happened with the Church? Even if today we would like to see the teaching of the Church is not so popular. I hope that I'm wrong. So how can we evaluate the social church teaching is having effort in the movement, not only in the teaching? This is my question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Father. We take one more reaction before giving the floor to the Cardinal. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the social teaching of the Church, the Church wasn't late, probably late in the terms of formulation, but it had always lived. It had always lived the exigency of the social concern, as it were. When even, for example, you look at the different religious congregations and when they were born. All the religious congregations which were born in those early days were all responding to social concern, either to poor ones in society, sick ones, or whatever. So it took the form of concrete action, okay? And from the concrete action, it made the formulation of the principles. Okay, so the response, the Church's response to the needs of the poor, it's always been there, right from from Scripture, from the early church on. So it's been there. Now the formulation of this in Rerum Novarum and now the different encyclicals that we're getting, there's another form that is taken. And the problem rather would be if we limit the church's social response to social concern to formulating principles and forsaking the action, that would be the problem. Okay, so the concrete action was there, even to the point of the Knights of Malta, even the type of thing that led to the Crusaders. LB were all people's response to, to protect whatever, different ways. And that action was there, and out of that action grew the movement, and out of that movement grew the thoughts, Jacques Maritain and his group, and so the formulation of the principles came. Our prayer now is that we will not have principles without the action. So the action led to the formulation. Now the real threat and danger is that we stick to the formulated principles, and their application now begins to lack. Okay, and that's the thing that we hope we never get to. It is also true, though, that for principles formulated, this has been said, a little known. Some have referred to the church's social teaching as the well-kept secret of the church. Okay, that's how some refer to a church's social teaching as the well-kept secret of the church. But this is something that not only our dicastery, but this is something that increasingly is being brought to bear. In several ways, our initiatives in this regard have been taking the church's social teaching to Davos. You know Davos, the World Economic Forum. This is businessmen coming together. What does the church have to do there? But we're there. And since I've been here, since 2014, I've always taken the message of the Pope to Davos. And we do not only take the message of the Pope, which is read at the beginning, but then we organize events to talk about some of the principles of church's social teaching. And so even so now we've gone one step further. And the one step further is to try to say Mass for the people at Davos in the morning before they begin work. When we started, it was 5 people who came. Second year, became 15 people. Now, the last time we did it before the COVID, we have 45 people. So these business people who come to Davos, Catholics are there among them. And so tapping in on that, we now begin to organize with the help of a group in the United States called SDG 17 Partnership. We organize and we create a forum. Okay, and the last one we did was about Pope Francis and Laudato Si. Okay, what principles he talks about, and the hall was full. So gradually we begin to talk about this, and there is a project we're working on now about introducing this in the area of investment. Okay, for business people. Okay, that the principles can also guide the life of investment officers and portfolio managers and all of these. So gradually, we're trying to get it out there, and we talk about it, and most importantly, encouraging the business schools in the world to introduce the church's social teaching in their syllabus. We had it done in IESE, IESE in Barcelona, I think in Spain it is. And then in Santiago, Chile, we did it also there. A few places, we gradually in Murcia, in Spain. So a few places we encouraging the church's social teaching at the Institutes of Business Studies to include reference to the church's social teaching as guidelines for some of the activities. So gradually, it's picking up.
Thank you, Your Eminence. I should say that this last question is actually part of our general conference, because the third part of our general conference is to see how we could implement it in the formation, especially the social teaching and the legacy of Father Deon.
You know the challenges we have. So I'll tell you. We've told bishops' conferences, okay, to include the church's social teaching on the syllabus of their formation houses. And you know the response we get? Oh, the seminary syllabus is already loaded. Okay? So they tell us that the syllabus for the seminaries is already loaded. Okay, and so sometimes it is done a little bit in moral theology. Okay, moral theology, sometimes they spend a little bit of time on the church's social teaching. But we would wish that more attention will be paid to the church's social teaching, because it affects, it's not simply, as you know, the character of the church's social teaching is a dialogue between faith and reason. And that also makes the church's social teaching a very powerful instrument for evangelization. When you take the Bible alone to go talk to somebody who's not a Christian, you're going with the Bible. When you take the church's social teaching, which is Bible with either economic principle, sociology, you have something that appeals to the non-believer. And so it's our discovery that the church's social teaching is also a very useful tool of evangelization. It opens doors for engagement with those who do not have the faith, because we can talk about things that are not faith alone, but faith and reason. And so the reason part enables us to make inroads into areas which otherwise will not be difficult, will not be easy to get to.
Merci beaucoup, Votre Éminence. Je pense que nous tirons vers la fin de nos activités cette matinée. Je voudrais tout simplement vous rappeler que nous reviendrons ici à 15 heures pour la deuxième conférence. Et nous aurons l'occasion de discuter aussi au carrefour, dans les carrefours. Après cette deuxième conférence, nous aurons à réagir sur les deux conférences. Donc, nous avons le temps de méditer et de pouvoir discuter aussi dans les carrefours. Donc, je voudrais une fois de plus remercier Son Éminence pour cette conférence qui nous a permis de retravailler et de nous engager, de continuer notre dynamique de cette conférence générale.
Merci. Merci pour la modération. Thank you.
Donc nous arrêtons et nous nous retrouvons cet après-midi à 15 heures.
Ok, come avete sentito i discorsi di questa mattinata sono così conclusi, con una lunga presentazione sull'impegno sociale, la dottrina sociale della Chiesa, e naturalmente ci vedremo nel pomeriggio alle 3. Questo pomeriggio alle ore 15 sarà Padre Giuliano Stenico che parlerà di riparazione e fratelli tutti. Quindi ci concentreremo sull'enciclica di Papa Francesco Fratelli Tutti. Vi ricordo anche che dopo, alle ore 15, qui avremo alcuni ospiti e parleremo appunto di Fratelli Tutti ed economia con la nostra Dehonians Social Room. Quindi buon pomeriggio e ci vedremo appunto nel pomeriggio. Grazie per questa diretta e a presto.